Chapter 5 The Wooden Bowl. Adapted from Leo Tolstoy's The Wooden Bowl.
Old people often feel insecure as their health starts falling and they are left to live alone when their need for.
Avi loved his parents very much. As the only child, he was a center of attention at home. But this had not spoiled him. His father would always say,
"Let us never forget our beginning."
Because Mukul, Avi's father, was a farmer's son. His parents lived in Karamadal, not far away from Coimbatore. Avi and his parents would often go to visit his grandparents. He and his cousins loved to play in the fields and orchards that surrounded his grandparents' home. In the distance, one could see the blue hills, sometimes surrounded by fleecy white clouds. Avi loved the countryside. His friends at school would sometimes laugh at him. They would say, "This is 21st century, Avi. Don't live in the past." Avi would only smile and say,
A tree that forgets its roots cannot grow.
He loved his grandparents very much. He used to listen to stories that his grandmother narrated to him and his cousins. His grandmother was a great storyteller. Avi shared a silent bond with his grandfather. The old man loved the land that he tilled. While his cousins were busy eating raw mangoes or guavas, Avi would sit under a tree with his grandmother, looking at the goats and cows grazing nearby. Sometimes Avi would pick up some mud and let it slip through his hands. His grandfather would say,
That mud is more valuable than gold.
Thus there grew a bond between them, one that was built around the air, the grass, the green fields, and the hills far away. A bond that seemed permanent as the earth. All this was perhaps too good to last. Avi's grandmother passed away. Avi's father Mukul spoke to his brother and sister about his grieving father.
I'm prepared to look after him.
He said,
Maybe it is time that we dispose the land.
Avi was very unhappy when he heard about this.
Why are we selling the land, Dad?
He asked.
Grandpa loved the land. You have told me so many times that we should not forget our beginnings. It is through working on the land that he supported all three of you. Why do you want to break his heart?
His father looked down sadly at Avi.
That way of life is no more, Avi. Grandpa is old and cannot live by himself. Just think, he will be coming to live with us.
And that was how grandfather came to live with Avi's parents. Through the difficult months following Grandma's death, the only bond that kept the old man attached to life was his relationship with his grandson. Though they lived in a flat in Kanpur, Avi's mother had many pots in the small balcony where she grew a few herbs and flowers. Avi's grandfather would sit there for hours, staring sorrowfully at the sky. Avi would come back from school in the evenings and sit with his grandfather. He could feel his grandpa's loneliness, but felt helpless. He did not know what he could do about it. There were many questions in Avi's mind. Why did he have to live in the city? Why did Dad have to work in a big company? Sometimes he would ask his grandfather. The old man would answer,
Life moves on. Maybe someday you will go back to the land that gives you life and food.
Avi's mother loved her husband and her young son, but she was helpless about the loneliness of her father-in-law. It had been different when she had gone to Banaras. There she had seen a very different attitude of her father-in-law. He was strong and capable, and she had found him happy. Here he seemed to have shrunk in size, weak and helpless. He stayed at home, unable to continue his farming work. She was not accustomed to talking to him. and found very little to share with him. Sometimes she was very impatient with him, especially the days when his hands trembled and he dropped what he was holding in his hands. One morning at breakfast, grandfather's old hands shook so much that his coffee spilled on the clean white tablecloth, and the glass slipped and broke into many pieces. Avi's mother spoke harshly to him. Observing this and unable to eat any more breakfast, Avi got up and went away. After that, grandfather had to eat his meals all alone in the kitchen. Avi kept quiet about his new arrangement. So did Avi's father. Avi was scared that if he confronted his mother, she would ask him, "Are you ready to stay at home and clean the mess every day?" Now, grandfather began telling stories to Avi in the evening. His stories were different from his grandma's stories. They were about birds and grains and ants and goats, and all the things that he had loved and observed keenly when he was farming. Avi was very happy. The little veranda where they sat became a wonderland place where there was no pain, and they could roam happily, hand in hand, in an imaginary countryside. As he grew older, Grandpa's hands shook more and more. One night his hand trembled, and he dropped his bowl of porridge. The porridge spilled all over the kitchen floor, and the bowl shattered into many pieces. Avi's father and mother, closely followed by the child, rushed to the kitchen. "Oh no, my beautiful ceramic bowl!" wailed his mother. She burst into a torrent of unkind words. She said that she had decided to give food to the old man in a wooden bowl. Avi was very upset, not only by the anger on his mother's face, but also by the look of fear on his grandfather's face. His grandpa was scared. Avi's father left the room. Avi watched silently as she cleaned up the floor, murmuring and mumbling all the while. Suddenly, Avi took a small piece of wood from the side of the shelf and began to whittle it, keeping his eyes on the broken bowl as though it were a model. His parents, curious to see what he was doing, went over to him. "What are you doing, Avi?" asked his mother fondly.
I am making a wooden bowl for you to have when you grow old,
answered Avi. Avi's mother and father were too ashamed to meet Avi's eyes. For a minute, perhaps, they had a glimpse of what their own future might be like. His mother then took grandpa